The courtroom smelled like recycled air and broken promises. Nina Reyes stood in the center of a floating platform, her wrists bound by energy cuffs that hummed against her skin. Around her, 12 alien judges sat in a half-circle, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks. None of them would meet her eyes. She was 34 years old. She had spent 15 years studying plants on dozens of worlds. She had saved 3 colonies from crop failures and discovered medicine that healed thousands. None of that mattered now. Nina Reyes of Earth, the head judge spoke through a translator device. You have been found guilty of sabotage against Helix Industries. You destroyed equipment worth 40 million credits. You delayed a legal terraforming project by 3 years. Nina wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them about the protected forest she had tried to save. She wanted to explain that Helix had bribed local officials to reclassify the land. She wanted to show them the fake evidence they had planted in her quarters. But she had already tried. No one listened. The sentence, the judge continued, is exile to Vorax 7. A murmur ran through the observation gallery above. Nina felt her stomach drop. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Vorax 7, the flesh garden, a world where every plant was a killer. The jungle itself was alive and hungry. Exiles sent there lasted 11 hours on average. Some died in minutes. The longest survivor had made it 3 days before the plants finally caught her. It was not an execution. Officially, it was exile, but everyone knew the truth. Do you have any final words? The judge asked. Nina lifted her head. She looked at the corporate lawyers from Helix sitting in the front row. They were smiling. They had won. I have one request, she said. Her voice was calm. Drop me during daylight hours. I want to see what kills me. The lawyers laughed. The judges said nothing. 2 guards took her arms and led her away. They gave her 12 hours before the drop. She spent them in a small cell, eating her last meals and thinking, not about death, about survival. Nina had grown up on a farm in Argentina. She had learned about plants before she could read. Her grandmother had taught her that every living thing wanted to survive. Plants were no different. They did not hate humans. They simply followed their nature. During her military years, she had trained in the worst places on Earth, deserts that could cook a person alive, jungles full of poison, frozen wastelands where a single mistake meant death. She had learned one lesson above all others: panic kills faster than any environment. She would not panic. The guards came for her at dawn. They stripped her of everything except a thin prisoner uniform. No tools, no weapons, no communication device, just cloth and skin. The drop pod was small and cold. They strapped her into a seat and sealed the door. Through a tiny window, she watched the station grow smaller as the pod fell toward the green world below. Vorax 7 filled the window. From orbit, it looked beautiful, endless jungle in 100 shades of green, rivers that sparkled in the sunlight, mountains rising through the canopy like islands in a green sea. But Nina knew the truth. Every shade of green down there was a different way to die. The pod hit atmosphere. Fire wrapped around the hull. The heat made her sweat, but she stayed calm. She studied the canopy rushing toward her. She noticed patterns in the green. Some areas were darker than others. Some trees stood taller than the rest. Dark meant old growth. Old growth meant established territory. Established plants did not need to hunt as aggressively as young ones. The pod crashed through the canopy with a sound like thunder. Branches snapped. Vines tore. Something screamed, and Nina was not sure if it was the metal or something alive. Then everything stopped. She hung upside down in her seat, blood rushing to her head. The pod had landed at an angle, caught in a web of thick vines. Through cracks in the hull, she could see movement. The vines were not just holding the pod, they were squeezing it. Digestive fluid began to seep through the cracks. It smelled like rotting fruit and acid. Where it touched the metal, the surface bubbled and smoked. Nina had maybe 4 minutes before the pod became a stomach. She did not scream. She did not pray. She reached for the emergency release on her seat harness and began to work. The plants of Vorax 7 were about to learn something that the Galactic Union had forgotten. Humans did not come from a safe world. Earth was full of predators and poisons and disasters. Humans had survived ice ages and volcanoes and plagues. They were not easy to kill. Nina freed herself from the harness and dropped to the lowest point of the tilted pod. The acid was pooling. There, but she avoided it. She found the emergency hatch and kicked it open. Fresh air rushed in, along with the smell of a living jungle. Things clicked and hissed in the darkness beyond. Leaves rustled without wind. Something dripped. Nina Reyes climbed out of her coffin and stepped into the most dangerous place in the known galaxy. She had 11 hours to beat the average. She planned to do much better than that. 3 drops of blood fell from Nina's finger onto a broad leaf below her. The leaf curled instantly, wrapping around the blood like a gift. Then it turned black and fell from its stem, dead. Nina smiled for the first time since her trial. She had cut her finger on purpose. The blood was a test. Human blood contained iron, salt, and chemicals that most alien plants had never tasted. To this jungle, she was poison. She squeezed more blood onto her uniform, spreading it across the fabric. The smell would mark her. Anything that hunted by scent would think twice before attacking something so toxic. The pod behind her groaned. The vines had crushed it completely now, pulling the metal into the jungle's endless hunger. In a few hours, nothing would remain. Vorax 7 wasted nothing. Nina moved deeper into the green darkness. The jungle was alive in ways she had never seen before. Plants did not just grow here. They hunted. Pitcher-shaped flowers as large as bathtubs waited with open mouths. Vines hung like ropes, but they moved when she passed, reaching for her warmth. The ground itself was soft and sticky, ready to trap anything that stood still too long. But Nina was not still. She walked with purpose, studying everything. She noticed that the hunting plants avoided certain areas. Near rocky outcrops and mineral deposits, the jungle thinned. The soil there contained something the plants could not digest. She marked these safe zones in her mind, building a mental map. As the light faded, she found her first shelter. A massive tree had died and fallen long ago. Its trunk was hollow and the wood had hardened into something like stone. The hunting plants avoided dead matter. There was nothing left to eat. Nina crawled inside and sealed the entrance with rocks and dry leaves. Then she waited for night. The darkness brought new sounds, things clicking in patterns too regular to be random, something large moving through the canopy above, and closer, much closer, the scratch of claws on bark. She pressed herself against the back of the hollow trunk and watched the entrance. Eyes appeared in the darkness, small and yellow, low to the ground, then more eyes, 12, 2 dozen. They formed a half circle around her hiding place, watching without blinking. Nina did not move, she barely breathed. One of the creatures crept forward into a patch of moonlight. It was the size of a dog, covered in scales the color of mud. Its body was flat and wide, built for squeezing through tight spaces. Its mouth was full of small, sharp teeth designed for tearing dead flesh. Scavengers, they fed on whatever the plants left behind, and they were waiting for her to die. "Sorry to disappoint you," Nina whispered. The creatures flinched at her voice. They had never heard prey speak before. For a long moment, they stared at her with something that might have been confusion. Then the leader did something unexpected. It lowered its head to the ground and pushed something toward her with its nose. A small lump of something organic, half digested by plant acid. An offering. Nina understood. These creatures, whatever they were, had watched exiles die for years. They had seen humans scream and run and get eaten. But this human was different. This human walked where they could not walk. This human made the plants die with her blood. To them, she was not prey. She was something new, something worth appeasing. Nina picked up the offering. It was disgusting, but it contained protein. She ate it without complaint. The creatures watched her with growing fascination. "Thank you," she said. She held up her empty hands. "I have nothing to give back, not yet." The leader tilted its head. It did not understand her words, but it understood her tone. Calm, respectful, not afraid. One by one, the creatures retreated into the darkness. But they did not go far. Nina could still see their eyes watching from a safe distance, waiting. She slept in short intervals, waking every hour to check her surroundings. The creatures never approached again. They simply watched as if studying her. When dawn light crept through the jungle canopy, Nina emerged from her shelter. 12 hours had passed. She had already beaten the average. The scavenger creatures had left more offerings near her hollow trunk. Small bones picked clean, shells that still held moisture, things that the jungle had rejected but that she could use. Nina collected everything. In a survival situation, nothing was worthless. She looked at the watching eyes in the shadows. These creatures knew this jungle better than any outsider ever could. They knew where the deadliest plants waited. They knew where water was safe. They knew everything she needed to learn. And they were afraid of her. Fear could be useful, but respect was better. Nina held up one of the bones they had given her. Then slowly and deliberately she bit into it. She chewed and swallowed, showing them that she accepted their gift. The eyes in the shadows blinked. Then, for the first time, one of the creatures stepped fully into the light. It sat on its haunches and waited, watching her with something that was almost hope. Nina smiled. She had not found allies, not yet, but she had found something almost as valuable. She had found students. But survival was not enough. She needed to understand this world. The scavenger creatures, which she now called Morith after the sound they made when greeting each other, had become her shadows. They followed her everywhere, watching her every action. When she avoided a dangerous plant, they learned. When she found safe water, they learned. She was teaching them without meaning to. Now it was time for them to teach her. She pointed at the darkest part of the jungle, where even the Morith refused to go. Then she pointed at her eyes, then at the path ahead. She wanted to see. She wanted them to guide her. The Morith leader, a scarred female with a torn ear, made a sound of distress. She pointed at the dark jungle with her nose, then made a gesture across her throat. Death. That way was death. Nina nodded. She understood. Then she started walking toward the darkness anyway. The Morith followed at a distance. They would not abandon her, even if she was walking into a grave. The deeper jungle was different. The plants here were larger, older, more patient. They did not lunge and grab like the young ones near her landing site. Instead, they waited. Centuries of waiting had taught them that prey always made mistakes eventually. But Nina did not make mistakes. She moved slowly, testing every step, never touching anything she did not have to touch. The Morith watched in amazement as she walked through killing fields that had claimed thousands of their ancestors. After 3 hours, she found what she was looking for. Ruins. They rose from the jungle floor. Like bones of a giant. Walls of white stone half swallowed by vines. Towers that had collapsed into piles of perfect blocks. And everywhere carvings. Images of creatures she did not recognize, tending to plants, harvesting from them, living among them. This world had not always been a death trap. Someone had lived here once. Nina entered the largest building, stepping carefully over roots and debris. The Morith refused to follow her inside, but they waited at the entrance, making worried sounds. Inside, she found answers. The walls were covered in pictures that told a story. A civilization had built this place long ago. They had come to Vorax 7 and found a world of normal plants. Then they had changed the plants, enhanced them, made them into the ultimate recycling system. Every scrap of organic matter would be consumed and transformed into nutrients. Nothing would be wasted. The jungle was not natural. It was technology, a machine made of leaves and vines instead of metal and wire. Nina studied the pictures more carefully. She saw the ancient people feeding specific materials to specific plants. She saw the plants producing fruit in return. She saw children eating the fruit, healthy and happy. The flesh-eating jungle was not designed to kill. It was designed to farm. But something had gone wrong. The later pictures showed war, ships in the sky, fire falling from above, the people fleeing, leaving their garden behind. Without caretakers, the plants had continued their function. Consume, transform, grow, but with no one to guide them, they had become wild, hungry, dangerous. In the deepest room, Nina found what she needed. Sealed containers made of the same white stone as the walls. Inside were seeds, tools, and tablets covered in writing she could not read, but pictures she could understand. Instructions, how to feed the plants, how to control them, how to make the garden work again. She selected her first test subject, a small vine near the ruins. According to the pictures, this type of plant needed mineral-rich soil and organic matter in specific amounts. Too little and it would hunt for food. Too much and it would produce fruit. Nina gathered dead leaves and crushed rocks. She mixed them in the proportions shown in the ancient pictures. Then she buried the mixture at the base of the vine. For a long moment, nothing happened. The vine swayed gently, sensing her presence but not attacking. Then it flowered. Beautiful purple blossoms opened along its length, and in the center of each blossom, a small green fruit began to form. Nina laughed out loud. The sound echoed through the ruins and scared the Morith outside, but she did not care. She was not just a survivor anymore, she was a gardener. She gathered more seeds and tools from the ruins. The walk back to her shelter took hours, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing with plans. When she emerged from the deep jungle, the Morith surrounded her. They sniffed at the things she carried, confused but curious. She showed them the fruit from the vine, still growing, still ripening. Tomorrow, she would teach them what she had learned. The Galactic Union had sent her here to die. Instead, she had found an abandoned paradise waiting to be awakened. Nina looked up at the stars appearing through gaps in the canopy. Somewhere up there, the people who had framed her were celebrating her death. They were going to be very disappointed. The fruit was bright orange and fit perfectly in a Morith's small hands. The scarred female held it like it was made of glass, staring at it with eyes full of fear and wonder. "Eat it," Nina said gently. "It is safe, I promise." 2 weeks had passed since her discovery in the ruins. 2 weeks of experiments, failures, and finally success. She had learned to read the jungle like a book written in a language she was only beginning to understand. The Morith leader sniffed the fruit. Every instinct in her body screamed that eating something from the jungle meant death. Her ancestors had learned that lesson across countless generations. Eating plants meant pain. Eating plants meant poison. Eating plants meant dying slowly while the jungle digested you from the inside. But this human had changed everything. The female bit into the fruit. Juice ran down her scaled chin. Her eyes went wide. Then she made a sound Nina had never heard before, a high, singing note of pure joy. Within seconds, every Morith in the camp surrounded Nina, reaching for more fruit. She had prepared dozens, knowing this moment would come. She handed them out carefully, making sure every creature received one. The sounds of happiness filled the jungle. For the first time in the history of their species, the Morith were not hungry. Over the following weeks, word spread. Morith traveled from distant parts of the jungle. Drawn by stories of the strange human who made the plants give instead of take, they came hungry and afraid. They left fed and hopeful. Nina taught them everything: how to prepare the feeding mixture, how to identify which plants could be converted, how to recognize the signs of successful cultivation. The Morith learned quickly. They had always been smart. They had simply never had a chance to be anything more than survivors. Her camp grew into a village, shelters made from dead wood and hardened plant matter, storage areas for food, a nursery for young Morith who had lost their parents to the jungle's hunger. One of those orphans was a small male with pale scales and curious eyes. He followed Nina everywhere, watching her hands when she worked, copying her movements. She named him Pip because of the sound he made when he was excited. Pip became her assistant. He was too young to remember the hungry times, so he had no fear of the plants. He touched them freely, fed them eagerly, and celebrated each new fruit like a miracle. "You are the future," Nina told him one night, as they sat watching the converted plants glow softly in the moonlight. Some of the ancient flowers produced light when properly fed. The village looked like a garden of stars. Pip did not understand her words, but he understood her tone. He curled up against her side and fell asleep, trusting completely. The Morith elders were less trusting. They remembered the old ways. They remembered worshipping the jungle as an angry god that demanded flesh. They had taught their children to accept death, to see being eaten as a sacred duty. Now this human was teaching them something different. The jungle was not a god. It was a tool. It could be controlled. Some of the elders resisted. They said Nina was dangerous. They said she would anger the jungle and bring destruction upon them all. But as the weeks passed and no destruction came, their voices grew quieter. It was hard to argue with full bellies. 3 months after her exile, Nina stood on a hill overlooking her village. 500 Morith lived there now. The converted jungle around them was thick with fruit and safe paths. Children played in areas that would have killed them before. She had done more than survive. She had built something. "We are not finished," she said to the scarred female, who now served as her translator to the other Morith groups. "There is more jungle. To convert, more Morith to save. This is just the beginning." The female nodded. She still did not understand all of Nina's words, but she understood the meaning. More work, more growth, more hope. That night, Nina dreamed of Earth. She dreamed of her grandmother's farm, where she had first learned to love growing things. She dreamed of her military service, training in places that wanted to kill her. She dreamed of the courtroom and the judges who refused to listen. She woke to Pip shaking her arm urgently. Something was wrong. She followed him to the edge of the village, where a crowd of Morith had gathered. They were pointing at the sky, making sounds of terror. Nina looked up. Through a gap in the canopy, she could see lights moving among the stars, ship lights, and they were getting closer. Her stomach dropped. The Galactic Union sent survey ships to Exile worlds every 6 months. They documented the deaths, updated their records, and moved on. No one ever expected survivors. But there would be survivors now, hundreds of them. And when the Union found out what she had done here, when the corporations learned that their death sentence had failed, they would not be pleased. Nina watched the lights descend toward the planet's surface. Her peaceful garden was about to get very complicated. The survey ship landed in a clearing 3 kilometers from Nina's village. She watched it through gaps in the canopy, counting the figures that emerged. 6 in Union uniforms, 12 in black armor with corporate logos. Helix Industries had come to finish the job. Commander Devin Ockafer was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had led survey missions to Exile worlds for 20 years. He had documented thousands of deaths. He had never, not once, found anyone alive. "Spread out," he ordered his team. "Standard sweep pattern, document everything." The corporate soldiers moved ahead, weapons raised. They were not here to document. They were here to make sure Nina Reyes stayed dead. "Commander," one of his officers said quietly, "the corporate team seems very eager." "I noticed." Ockafer did not trust Helix Industries. He had seen too many convenient accidents on their projects, but he had no authority over their soldiers. He could only watch. The jungle made its first move within an hour. A corporate soldier stepped on what looked like solid ground. It was not. A massive pitcher plant had covered itself with leaves and waited for exactly this moment. The soldier fell screaming into digestive acid. His teammates tried to pull him out, but the walls were slick and the acid was fast. He stopped screaming after 30 seconds. 3 more died before noon. Vine traps, poison spores, a plant that shot needles. The jungle was methodical in its killing, picking off soldiers one by one. Ockafer kept his team close to the ship. The Union officers knew how to respect a death world. The corporate soldiers did not. By evening, only 8 corporate soldiers remained. Their leader, a hard-faced woman named Cross, was furious. "This jungle is supposed to be random," she snapped at Ockafer. "These attacks are coordinated. Something is directing them." Ockafer did not answer. He was looking at his scanner. It showed heat signatures ahead, many of them moving in organized patterns. Commander, his officer whispered. Those readings, they look like a settlement. Cross grabbed the scanner from his hands. Her face went pale. That is impossible, she said. No one survives here. But someone had. They found Nina's village at sunset. 500 Morith working in converted jungle gardens. Shelters made of plant material and stone. Storage buildings full of food. And at the center of it all, a human woman in ragged clothes, surrounded by small creatures who looked at her like she was their mother. Cross raised her weapon. Nina Reyes, you are ordered to surrender. Nina did not move. On what charge? I already served my sentence. I was exiled. This is where I live now. You were supposed to die. Sorry to disappoint you. HFY stepped forward. Wait, everyone calm down. He looked at Nina with amazement. You survived 3 months on a world where the average is 11 hours. How? I learned, Nina said simply. The jungle is not a weapon. It is a garden that was abandoned. I figured out how to tend it again. Cross laughed bitterly. A nice story, but it changes nothing. Helix Industries has invested billions in the Vorax 7 Exile program. If word gets out that someone survived, that the jungle can be tamed, the program ends. The company loses everything. She raised her weapon again. You should have stayed dead, Reyes. The Morith surged forward, hissing and clicking. They were small, but there were hundreds of them. Cross's remaining soldiers formed a defensive circle. Stop, Nina, commanded. Her voice was calm but firm. The Morith froze. They did not understand her words, but they understood her tone. I will not let anyone else die for me, Nina said. She looked at Pip, who was clutching her leg with terror in his eyes. She gently pushed him toward the scarred female. Then she walked toward Cross, hands raised. You want me? Fine, take me. Leave my people alone. Cross smiled. It was an ugly smile full of victory. Finally, some cooperation. She reached for Nina's arm. And the jungle woke up. It started as a trembling in the ground. Then the plants around the clearing began to move, not hunting, not random, deliberate. Vines rose like snakes. Flowers turned toward the soldiers, leaves rustled with purpose. Cross looked around in panic. What is happening? Nina understood. She had fed these plants for months. Her blood, her sweat, her breath were all part of them now. They knew her scent. They knew she was their gardener. And they knew she was in danger. 3 months, Nina said softly. 3 months of teaching them. I thought I was just farming, but I was bonding. They know me, and they protect what they know. A vine wrapped around Cross's ankle. She screamed and fired her weapon wildly. The shot went wide, hitting nothing. More vines came, and flowers with teeth, and roots that burst from the ground. HFY grabbed his team and ran for the ship. He was a survivor. He knew when to retreat. But he also knew what he had seen, and he was already composing his report in his head. Nina Reyes was alive, and she was not alone. Cross died screaming. The jungle was not cruel about it, but it was thorough. Within minutes, all 8 corporate soldiers had been consumed. The plants worked together like a single organism, sharing the nutrients, wasting nothing. Nina stood in the center of the chaos, untouched. The vines moved around her like gentle waves. The flowers turned toward her like faces seeking sunlight. She was not their master. She was their partner. Commander HFY watched from the edge of the clearing, his recorder running. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. This is Commander Devin HFY, Galactic Union Survey Corps. I am documenting what appears to be a successful exile survival on Vorax 7. Subject Nina Reyes is alive. She has established a functioning colony with the native species. The corporate security team sent by Helix Industries has been neutralized by the local flora. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Based on my observations, I believe the original charges against Reyes were fraudulent. I am requesting an immediate review of her case and full protection for her settlement. The recording would travel faster than any ship. Within hours, it would reach Union Command. Within days, it would be on every news feed in the galaxy. Helix Industries had wanted to bury Nina Reyes. Instead, they had made her famous. 6 weeks later, a Union legal team arrived on Vorax 7. They brought supplies, medical equipment, and most importantly, records. Complete records of Nina's original trial. The fraud was obvious once anyone bothered to look. Forged signatures, doctored evidence, witnesses who had been paid to lie. The terraforming project Nina had tried to stop was operating on land that should have been protected. Helix had bribed officials to change the classification. Nina had been right. She had always been right. The legal team offered her many things: a full pardon, restoration of her professional licenses, compensation for her suffering, a position at any research facility she wanted. She refused everything except the pardon. "This is my home now," she told them, standing in her garden as fruit ripened on vines that had once been killers. "These are my people. I will not leave them." The lawyers did not understand, but they accepted her decision. The Galactic Union reclassified Vorax 7 from a death world to a protected sanctuary. No more exiles would be sent there. No corporations could claim the land. The jungle belonged to Nina and the Morith. Helix Industries faced charges that would take years to resolve. Their executives claimed innocence. No one believed them. The company's stock crashed. Partners fled. The empire they had built on lies began to crumble. Commander Okafor visited Nina before his ship departed. "You know," he said, "other death worlds exist, other exile programs, other people abandoned to die on planets the Union considers worthless." Nina nodded slowly. "I know. Someone with your skills could help them, if they wanted to." She looked at Pip, who had grown taller in the past months. He was teaching younger Morith how to tend the gardens now. He no longer needed her constant guidance. "Maybe someday," she said, "but first I need to train others, build something that can survive. Without me, then we will see." Okafor smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him. "I will hold you to that, Reyes." He left, and Nina returned to her work. Years passed. The settlement grew into a proper town. The Morith developed writing, taught to them by Nina using their own symbols. They recorded their history both before and after the gardener came. Pip grew into a leader. He was the first Morith to leave Vorax 7, traveling as an ambassador to the Union capital. He wore a necklace of seeds from the first plant Nina had converted. It reminded him of who he was and where he came from. Other survivors found their way to Vorax 7, people from other exile worlds who had heard the stories, people who had nowhere else to go. Nina welcomed them all and taught them what she knew. The jungle continued to grow, but it was no longer wild. It was tended, loved, understood. On the anniversary of her exile, Nina sat in her garden as the sun set. The plants around her glowed with soft light, colors shifting through purple and gold. Pip sat beside her, now fully grown, his scales marked with the symbols of his people's new written language. "The stars sent you here to die," he said. His speech was slow but clear. He had learned human words. "Yes," Nina agreed. "But you did not die. You planted life instead." Nina smiled. She picked a fruit from a nearby vine. It was bright orange, perfectly ripe. She bit into it, and juice ran down her chin just like it had when the scarred female had first tasted freedom. "They sent me to be eaten," she said. "Instead, I taught a death world how to feast." Pip made the high singing sound of Morith joy. It echoed through the garden, and other Morith joined in. The sound filled the jungle, mixing with the rustle of leaves and the hum of life. Nina Reyes closed her eyes and listened. She was home,